Yeah, so the topic for today is just going to be looking at these curses which was given to the three creatures, namely the serpent, Eve, and Adam. We can begin looking at the serpent since he was the first one to get the curse. I don't know if it's a he, maybe the serpent was a she. The reason why the serpent is getting the curse is he was the one who made Eve doubt God. I know we spoke about this in the previous discussion, in that the serpent brought doubt. That wasn't the right thing.
Yeah, this part about the serpent being on his belly, it's just interesting. So what, like, did serpents walk around before that?
I would assume they were walking before that.
I guess snakes are the only animal with no legs, if you don't count fish.
I mean, I guess so many water creatures don't have legs. So one of the things that we're seeing in verse 14 there is the enmity between the snake and the woman being a curse which God puts on the two of them. So in verse 15 it says, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and their offsprings. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel."
Yeah. So I've heard people say, like, the offspring of the woman bruises his head, which is a fatal injury. And bruising a heel is, like the snake biting your heel is not necessarily fatal, especially if you have an antidote if the snake is venomous. And it's kind of like the generations. It's not literally about the woman, but it's about the future generations of the woman.
Yes. And what you said there is actually symbolized by the cross. We see that this hostility between human beings and the snake, it sort of points to the future defeat of the serpent by a future descendant of the woman. Bruising someone's head is more catastrophic than the heel. Like I said, is sort of like sin in Christ's suffering. Verse 15, I think you mentioned it some other time about it being the presentation of the gospel. And I actually learned a word when I was searching this called proto-evangelium.
Can I guess what it is?
Yes, you may guess what it is.
It sounds like prototype, so I'm guessing it's like a before picture of the gospel.
Oh, that's actually interesting. I didn't. You're right. It makes sense. When I saw the word, I didn't think it was coming. I was like, proto means something, but I couldn't. Yeah, exactly. It makes sense. Yeah. Prototype. So proto-evangelium. And so this was basically the first announcement of the gospel. The bruising of the heel even continues now as the devil bruises the heel, which is the church, as Christ is the head in heaven.
It's interesting because even though this was probably symbolic, right? Satan was probably, I don't know what the connection was exactly between Satan and snakes as an animal today. However, in general, human beings hate snakes. And also, especially women hate snakes. I feel like everyone hates them, but women even more so. Which is interesting because the curse extended to this whole, what's the proper scientific word? Class of animals or whole genre of animals. And it's kind of the first time we see, like, the curse of sin isn't just a consequence for humans, but it also has consequences in nature as well.
Moving over to verse 16, God pronounces two things to the woman. One, which is pain, and two, the desire for a husband. Actually, there could be three, because the third one, I think, being ruled by the husband. So there's actually three things God pronounced on the woman. Starting with the pain, it strikes something which is distinct about the woman, because the woman gives birth. And the other day I was talking about how the curse in itself, it says, "I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing." And I was like, does that mean there was already pain in childbearing? And, God just multiplied it. Because I think oftentimes we say, childbirth wasn't supposed to be painful. But I don't know. From what I seem to get there, it sounds like...
That's interesting.
It sounds like the pain was there, but God multiplied it. It's like, hitting something,
Yeah, like stubbing your toe versus giving birth.
Yep.
Yeah, because I think, at least from what I've heard, there's nothing quite as painful as giving birth.
So it is it is very important to note that that's not how God intended marriage to be.
Childbearing or marriage?
Oh, sorry. I'm now moving over to the second and third point. Talking about point number 2.
The word here is the same concept as Cain's desire for his brother.
Yes.
So it's this like jealousy that's twisted, maybe not even jealousy, but like wanting to be in control, manipulation, more than
Let's
just...
actually read Genesis 4 verse 7 because I think that would help explain.
If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Yeah, so I heard, I think I heard a women's talk about how part of the curse for women and wives is wanting to manipulate things with their husbands and wanting to, like if you have a guy that you're interested in and you try to figure out ways to see him all the time, to a certain extent, it's fine, but then sometimes it can become another thing.
The key to understanding the use of the word desire in verse 16 of chapter 3 is by reading chapter 4, verse 7.
Yeah, there's a verse in the New Testament too that talks about it, how it's like the progression of sin.
I know the verse you're talking about.
Yeah, it's the same concept, right? It doesn't start out, but the sin like progresses and starts like crouching at your door more and more.
In other words of what you said, going back to verse 16, when sin has the upper hand in woman, she will desire to overpower or subdue or exploit man. And when sin has the upper hand in man, he will respond in a like manner and with strength and subdue her or rule over her, which is what we'll read in Adam's portion.
Yeah, I don't know if the second part, because it's after the desire will be for your husband and he shall rule over you. So I don't know if like before the fall, men and women there wasn't a need for a leader in the family. I don't know, because like God had told Adam that he was the leader. He was responsible for her.
Yeah.
But then it's like changing here to something else. Your point, it sounds like what you're saying is that that's not how it's supposed to be. Just like this part isn't how it's supposed to be.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
For some reason, I've always read that as like, that's how your husband will be now. But it makes more sense that way. That's part of the curse, like a twisted relationship of the man like overpowering.
Yeah. Which is what has happened, I guess, from a few years after this, and men began to rule over the woman, and the woman became voiceless and powerless in the community. A few years ago, women couldn't participate in voting and things like that. So I don't think God's plan initially was for men to rule over women, but he had to lead the woman. So because no matter what relationship people have, at the end of the day, somebody has to be responsible with regards to something. And I think that's what God initially intended with the relationship between men and women. So moving over to man, we see Adam's punishment involves the very ground he was formed from. And it talks about him working the ground and him returning to the ground.
Do you think verse 17 means that you should never listen to me? Because it says, because you listen to the voice of your wife.
I had never thought about it, but I think that's what it says, actually.
Really? Nah, I don't think that's what it means.
What does it mean then?
I think it means like Adam's first priority was listening to the voice of God when it comes to leading his family. So I don't think it means he shouldn't have heard what his wife had to say, but I think he was supposed to be listening to God, not necessarily listening to his wife.
You seem to be saying what I'm saying.
Because it says...
It sounds like you just agreed with me.
I don't agree with you.
But you just said what you just said now.
Okay, the verse says, you listen to the voice of your wife, which I commanded you not to eat, right? You listened to her, you ate. I commanded you not to eat. So I think it's like God is supposed to be the priority, and he put his wife over God. So it doesn't mean that you don't listen to your wife ever, but it means you listen to God first.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. I think that part is very, very easy. When if God has said
don't eat.
If God said what?
If God says don't eat.
Or don't eat. Yes. If God says don't eat, and then the wife or anybody else comes and says, eat, you shouldn't eat. You should follow what God says. The problem comes when God hasn't said anything. For example, somebody asks us for money. They are in need. And you say, don't give that person the money. God has never said anything in his word about giving the homeless person the money. So I think that's where the biggest challenge is when it comes to having to listen to the wife and being able to lead and your response as the wife. So what do you think about that now? Something which God has not said.
Yeah, I don't even know. Must be hard to be a husband.
Which part don't you know?
It's hard to make decisions like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Both as the wife to be like trying to say something, and then like there's times where maybe I feel like something should be one way and you feel like something should be another. Or if I'm being sinful and like I don't want to do what God says, and it's like frustrating when you're saying we should do what God says.
Yeah, that's the reason why people should first of all understand that concept in marriage, that concept of marriage rather, before they get married. At least in the Christian setup. If you're not a Christian, you can use other means. But if you're a Christian and you want to follow God's word, then I think it's important to first of all understand the setup of marriage according to God and the Bible, that the man is the lead. And then once you understand that, you get married to somebody whom you can trust your life with. Because if you're going to get married to somebody and you do not trust their judgment of decision making, then that's going to be hard and difficult.
Yeah. That's true. No water break.
You cannot have a water break.
Why not?
I'm the husband here.
Oh my word. Oh my yay.
You see, you're dishonoring me on the podcast.
Oh my word.
Okay. So one of the things which I saw when I was looking at one of the commentaries, they said the punishment is not the work in itself, but rather the hardships and frustration that was going to accompany man's labor, especially because, he was getting everything for free. It was for free, yes. Everything was for free. It wasn't even a buy one, get one free, but it was completely free. So part of the curse to Adam was man's body would return to ground, meaning he was going to die. But this was not the intended result. Or intended way of life. If we read Romans 5 verse 12, if we can just read that, Romans 5 verse 12.
Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned.
So we see just how sin got into the world through Adam, and it made all of us sinners, and now we are deserving of death. But what we know is that is not the end of it. We look forward to a time when things will return back to normal. And let's read Romans chapter 8 verse 19 to 22.
For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption, and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now.
So this is just temporary, or the world has been like this for what 4,000 years now, 6,000 maybe. It sounds like a long time, but in comparison to what we're going to get into when Christ comes back, and verse 15 comes to complete fruition, the head being completely bruised.
Completely what?
Bruised.
But yeah, I think it's like you were saying about work, because Revelation talks about work too that we'll do in eternity for God. So it's not like work in itself is a curse, but having distractions while you work, lack of focus, having to do work that you're not necessarily passionate about because you need to survive. I think those are all part of the curse upon work. Just like childbearing in and of itself isn't a bad thing, but now you have to worry about what all is going to happen.
Anyway, that brings us to the end of this conversation and discussion about the curses to the three creatures. Our song of the week today is going to come from an old group called the Cross Movement. It was a Christian rap group, and they have a song called Times Table. That's going to be song of the week.
Cool.
So let me just refresh the lyrics to see what the main subject of the song was. And basically this song talks about time and how man was created, sin entering the world through Adam, and then Christ coming in to save us, and that only through Christ do we get redemption. So yeah, take a listen at it. It's an old song though, but it's a cool song.